All right, we are continuing with our study in the book of Daniel. We started with an introductory thing where we went over some history from Abraham up to the time of Daniel. And then we had our first study in the book of Daniel. In our last study, it was mostly background relative to the capture of Judah. The book is of Daniel telling of the things that happened in Babylon. Now, we talked about the failure of the leaders in Judah. I hope we got across the names of some of these people. The king Josiah was probably the king in the early part of Daniel's life. He was prophesied by a king a number of years earlier, or prophesied by a prophet a number of years earlier to be the king. He came in and he did everything that you would expect a man of God to do. He stopped the worship of idols and so forth in the land. But then his son, when he died, took over, named Jehoahaz. He was an evil son. And he was only king for 3 months, but he did a lot of damage to what his father had done, started idol worship back up. But then the Egyptians put his half-brother in the kingship, Jehoiakim. He was another evil son. So evidently, Josiah didn't have good leadership in his home, and his sons did a very evil job. But Daniel was taken into captivity by the heathen king Nebuchadnezzar, and there's some important verses. Verse 2 is one that we want to look at, and we're only looking at part of it here because I want to emphasize one word. It says, "And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hands," that is, into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. The Lord gave. It wasn't that this guy was, that Nebuchadnezzar was so strong that he could take it over. He was strong, but the reason that he was able to capture the city of Jerusalem was because God gave it to him. This made the Lord look weak, and we talked about that. It's only that he made him look weak, and as we go on through the book of Daniel, you'll see the mighty hand of God working in all kinds of places. But he tolerated that look of weakness. God tolerated that look of weakness so that he could accomplish his will. And he had a great plan in store. And that's what the book of Daniel is all about. Let's remember the immigration plan that they had in Babylon. It was very different from that they had in Assyria. Assyria just scattered people so that they were not likely to get together to cause a rebellion against the Assyrians. But Babylon, first of all, took 3,000 of the elite young men, took them to train them to be leaders. And then the next deportation was of 10,832. Amazing numbers here. This is given to us by Josephus. But they took the craftsman and the businessman to set up businesses in Babylon, so that when they took the workers, that was the third deportation, it took many. It didn't give us a number there, but took many into captivity. Jeremiah, the prophet, stayed in Jerusalem in a very poor condition there in Jerusalem, and ultimately they believe that he was taken to Egypt. But Nebuchadnezzar was a wise king. He didn't just take everybody at once and have a mess in the kingdom, have homeless people running around and that kind of a thing. He took them one at a time. He took, first of all, those that he could train to be leaders, and he trained them with 3 years of school. He didn't want the Babylonian Empire to be overrun with those that couldn't support themselves. So he wanted to rule appropriately. He wanted leaders that could do things, and then he brought in the businesses that could establish the economic thing, and then finally the workers. But Daniel trained in language, he trained in literature, trained in science, mathematics. But they changed his name. They imposed the names of the Babylonian gods and the Babylonian philosophy on them. We asked last time if American kids could succeed in such an environment. We got just to the edge of the things of Daniel's life. We saw that Daniel wasn't broken. His name meant my judge is God, or some people put it, he was God's judge, and both of those fit the type of person that Daniel was. But they changed his name. They changed it to something that they wanted to make him forget who he was and who his relationship to God was. They changed his name to Belteshazzar. And that was in relation to the gods of Babylon. But we see that in Babylon, they remembered his name. Last time I told you how many times they used Daniel's name relative to the number of times they used Belteshazzar's name. But I only told you the portion of the Hebrew portion of the book. There were 10 times let me back up just a step. The book of Daniel, starting in chapter 2, a few verses into chapter 2, they changed the language to Syriac. They call it Syriac. It's a dialect of Armenian, Aramaic, excuse me. It's a dialect of Aramaic. And they changed the thing there, and we see his name both in Aramaic and in Hebrew. There are 10 times that they call him Belteshazzar all through the book in both languages, and there are 75 times that they call him Daniel. So they remembered his name all through that. Daniel should have been at the end of his rope there. He's taken into captivity, and he's defamed in every way that you could think of. Or was he at the end of his rope? We're going to look at an outline in our book or in our study today. We're going to look at the Daniel's actions. We're going to see God's actions, and then we're going to see God's results. And all of these are important. We left off with verse 8 last time, but I want us to start with that in this particular session. And I'm going to start with it with just the first part of the verse. But Daniel purposed in his heart. He should have been at the end of his rope. He's determined. He should have been at the end of his rope, but there was nothing about that that they could do. His parents, grandparents, had taught him well. Now, we don't know much about we don't know anything about his family in Jerusalem, but I asked parents, grandparents, and children's Sunday school teachers and so forth, and we talked last time that we often miss the actual assignment that God gave. And I learned when I was studying the book of Ephesians and teaching the book of Ephesians that God never taught us to teach the kids the Bible stories. Now, don't misunderstand what I'm saying. He wants us to teach the Bible stories, but he wants us to get the point across. He wants us to get to the point where we teach them to love God. Daniel, we know a few of the stories. We know Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. We know Daniel in the lion's den. Those are wonderful stories. But they're there so that we can teach that God loves his people, that God is more powerful than any of the gods of the world. They're there for us to teach our kids to love God. Now, to remind you of that, I want to go to the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 6, starting with verse 4, says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord." The Babylonians were teaching Daniel that there are many gods and teaching him all about the many gods. God wants us to teach our children. Hear, O Israel. Now, this was to Israel, but I believe it's also applicable to us. The Lord our God is one Lord. And thou shalt love, there we go, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy might. All that you have in you should be teaching you to love God. Now, going on, says, "And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, when thou walkest in the way, and when thou drivest in the car." Oh, it doesn't say in the car. "And when thou liest down, and when thou risest up." Folks, we are to be teaching our kids all these things. This was a command to Israel, and we will show that it definitely applies to us. Daniel was never taught the stories of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He didn't know about those until later on. He didn't know about the lion's den until later on. Folks, but he loved the Lord his God. That is part of what we're going to gain out of this. Another area comes from the book of Romans. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. And I ask you, do you know that? Do you know that all things work together for good? The individual acts may not seem good. It didn't seem good to Daniel that he was taken off into captivity. It didn't seem good to Daniel that he was going to a school that would definitely not be approved of by his parents. But all things work together for good. I'm sure that Daniel had prayed about the war situation going on in his country. He had prayed for a different result than he saw. But still, he wound up trusting his God, even though it didn't work out the way he wanted. Things work together for good, and indeed, we're going to see Daniel being a major leader in 2 empires. And this would have never happened if Daniel had, or if Nebuchadnezzar had not been given the rule over Judah. Anyway, we see in the book of 2 Kings chapter 20 and verse 18 that they were going to demasculate the ones that they took out of Judah. I believe that's what happened to Daniel. He would never be able to worship in the temple again. He would be considered unclean. Things from God's temple were robbed and taken to Babylon and placed in the storeroom for the gods of Babylon. And so it looked like things were not going well for Daniel, but Daniel still loved and trusted his God, the God of Israel. Parents, it's our task to teach our kids to love God. Not just the stories. The stories are good, and the stories are a great help to us accomplishing, but we need to teach them that there's one God, and that God is one that we're to love with all of our heart, all of our mind, and all of our might. Daniel was taken to a foreign land and taught to worship many gods. Daniel had seen his king Josiah committed to undoing that kind of a thing. Then he saw his uncommitted sons undo what he had done. But Daniel caught on. He was probably taught at every moment that there was one God, and he was to love that God with all of his heart. Now, we also saw that Daniel purposed in his heart. Daniel purposed in his heart. Now, I love the stories of the Bible, and I love to teach that there's only one God, and to love that one God. But we're not to teach the stories just as entertainment. And I'm afraid that I taught the stories just as entertainment to my kids. King Kong is entertainment. Goliath is real stuff. I'm not sure that I did a good job of that, but God's purpose is for us to use those stories to teach our children to love him. Hear it again. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 and 5. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy might. Now, I hope you see that I'm passionate about this, that the Lord taught us what we're to teach our kids, to love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy might. That's what we're to deal with. Now let's go back to Daniel 1:8, and we were only reading part of the verse. Let's go with the whole verse. It says, But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Daniel was a Jew. He wanted to remain a Jew. And so he's hundreds of miles from home. Nobody's going to see him that cares, because all the rest of them are there with the attempted brainwashing that they're getting and so forth. And Daniel was called by the names of the gods that the people there worked. He was okay physically. Let me tell you, I took a trip to Japan. I've done it twice. And I think they must fly over Japan and spray droplets of raw fish all over the islands. Sushi was, I hate sushi, and I hate the idea of raw fish. Anyway, I took care of my business through, in various places in Japan. And I came back to Tokyo to get my flight to go back to the United States. I had to stay there overnight. And I looked there close to the hotel, and there was a McDonald's. And I said, wow, I can go. Now, I know you don't think that's exactly a steak bar or something like that, but I was so glad to see that place. And I went there, and I got in the place, and I could smell that raw fish. But I knew the flavor of McDonald's hamburgers, their grease burgers and their French fries. And so I ordered a hamburger and French fries. And have you ever tasted sushi flavored French fries? That's what I found there. Anyway, the foods that Daniel was running into, that wasn't his problem, wasn't the taste of the food. He was running into foods that had been offered and sacrificed to idols. And he knew that he didn't want to even appear to be compromising. So he asked there in verse 8 if the prince of the eunuchs, if he could retain and not eat the food that the king was serving him. So, there was a problem in the early church. The early church had developed a situation where, particularly in Antioch, was equal worship for Jews and Gentiles. But then a problem came up there. Some Jews came in and said that to become a Christian, before you could become a Christian, you had to be circumcised. And this argument went on, and finally they decided they would settle it by sending a group to Jerusalem, the mother church, where the most of the apostles were, and get them to answer that question. So they sent a delegation to the church there, and we find that in Acts 15, starting with verse 20. It says, but that we write to them, now this is after they've had some discussions about what to do, and this is the answer that they came up with, but that we write unto them that they abstain from pollutions of idols, and from fornication, and from things strangled, and from blood. Now, the problem was circumcision, understanding circumcision. But what do you see in the answer that they're giving about circumcision? There's no answer there about circumcision. It's about food. Folks, stay away from things that have been sacrificed to idols. That's what Daniel wanted to do. Stay away from things that were sacrificed to idols. And from fornication. Fornication, of course, can be in any place, but one of the big things they had in relation to idol worship was that fornication was practiced. They were actually having fornication with the prostitutes of the idol worship, and things strangled and from blood. Now these again were things that dealt with foods that had been offered and sacrificed to animals. The real issue was whether they worshiped Jehovah or worshiped the idols. Now Daniel was a Jew, and he wanted to make sure that he was worshiping Jehovah. So let's go to verse 9. It says, excuse me, I had to shift a little bit in my chair here. But God had brought Daniel into favor with tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. Now, this word brought is a word that sounds like Daniel was a sweet guy and he was favored by his boss. But Daniel was brought into favor with this guy. The word brought there is a word that is normally translated gave. Again, folks, God gave. God's the one that did this. It wasn't just because Daniel was so sweet. It was because God gave him favor with the prince of the eunuchs. In our last study, we saw that God had given the king of Judah into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. Here we see that God had given friendship with the chief prince of the eunuchs to and Daniel's guards. And we could bring this down to the boss. Daniel, yes, probably was a sweet guy, but God's the one that gave this. Be aware of that in your own relations with people, both those that love the Lord and those that don't. Going to verse 10. And the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed your meat, that is the meat that was probably prime rib that had been offered to idols. And the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed your meat and your drink. For why should he see your faces worse liking than the children which are of your sort, that is, the rest of the 3,000 Jews? Then shall ye make me endanger my head to the king. Now, this guy, like Daniel, he wanted to please Daniel, but he's saying, I got a job to do, and if I do my job, you're not going to look so good. You're going to get pimples, and you're going to look skinnier, and so forth, than the other guys. And the king's going to have my head. He's going to want to know why. Anyway, this, remember, is the king's food that Daniel's eating. He's in the king's cafeteria, not McDonald's. He's not just getting a McDonald's kids meal there. But anyway, the prince of the eunuchs was afraid for his own life relative to that. So Daniel offered a proposal to him. Verse 11. Then said Daniel to Melzar. Now the word Melzar just means waiter. So Daniel said to the waiter, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, prove thy servants. I beseech thee, I beg you, 10 days. Just 10 days. We got 3 years to be whatever the king wants. Just try us for 10 days, and let us be given pulse to eat and water to drink. Now, pulse is probably some type of vegetable. Then let our countenance be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat, and as thou seest, deal with thy servants. Now, Daniel is given Melzar, the waiter, the opportunity to test him just for 10 days out of 3 years. Says, look, just give us pulse. Now, the word pulse actually is seeded things, which is probably just meaning vegetables. But Daniel became a vegetarian, not particularly by choice, but so that he could not compromise that he was worshiping idols. And there were 3,000 Jews there. He says, compare them to us. So this proposal to the waiter didn't seem to be too bad. Verse 14. So he consented to them in the matter and proved them 10 days. And just remember, they've got 3 years to get everything right. Let's go to verse 15. At the end of 10 days, their countenance appeared fairer and fatter of flesh than all the children which did eat of the portion of the king's meat. Now, God acted here. Don't think that this idea of being a vegetarian is going to make you fat. I don't know what the Babylonians considered looking good. I don't know whether they wanted him to look like Kim Jong-un or a sumo wrestler, or whether they wanted him just filled out and nice and still slender. But whatever they were looking for, Daniel and his 3 friends, looked better than all of the rest of them. I had a friend at work that was a strict vegetarian. He was naturally a little pudgy guy, and he had health problems. And so he became a vegetarian to keep his weight down. And he was doing fine with that. John recorded in the book of John miracle after miracle so that we would believe. He tells us that in the next to the last chapter there, that he's telling these miracle after miracle after miracle that Jesus did so that we would believe in Jesus. You know, that's something that causes people to believe. But Daniel is a book of miraculous actions by God and of prophecies so that you would believe. These are prophecies that were not all fulfilled during Daniel's time, and actually there's some there that haven't even been fulfilled yet. They're to be fulfilled in our time and beyond. Anyway, the time was probably misunderstood because the Jews lost and the temple was robbed. Let's go on. Verse 16. Thus Melzar took away the portion of their meat and the wine that they should drink, and gave them pulse. Since they look good, the waiter says, okay, let's go with it. We'll keep your diet permanent. But there were 2,996 of the others that got the regular food, that got the king's food. And the waiter didn't want to experiment with them because, he wanted to do what the king wanted. But still, we're not to the end of miracles. Verse 17. As for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel understood in all visions and dreams. Now, at the end of the days, that is the end of 3 years, now at the end of the days that the king had said he should bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar, and the king communed with them, and among them all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king. 3 years passed. They stood before the king. And imagine the king interviewing all 3,000 of these young men. I'm not sure he did exactly that, but please notice the names that the king recognized them by. The others had been called by their Babylonian names, but not Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. This may not only be Daniel's writing. It may be what the king said, but it may just be that Daniel wrote it that way. Anyway, 3 years had passed, and Daniel at least remembered their names. And here we have another miracle. God gave them knowledge and skills. He gave them skills in learning and wisdom. He gave them a 4.0 grade point average of all the knowledge. But observe, it's God that gave them that. Now, I recall that I have prayed for grades. Oh, I worked so hard in school. I prayed for grades, and God gave me what it was worth from the study level that I did. Anyway, for these 4 Jews, study didn't matter. God gave them the wisdom, and God gave them the grades. God gave Solomon wisdom. Remember what Solomon prayed for when he became king. He prayed for wisdom to rule the people. And Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah received that same kind of wisdom. Not to rule, although they're going to, but only Daniel God gave the understanding and visions and dreams. Just like Joseph. Remember Joseph? He had some dreams that he interpreted, and that put him in the top rung of the Egyptian empire. But 3,000 in the program and special gifts given only to 4. At least that's all we know about. We don't really know about the others. Verse 20. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding, the king inquired of them, and he found them 10 times better than all not the other students, but all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. They were 10 times better than his teachers. Wow. What a miracle that was. The advisors to the king were the magicians and astrologers, and this 10 times is probably 10 times better than all of their teachers. Daniel saw both good and bad in his national leadership. He lived under foreign heathen kings. He saw good and bad under these kings. But the king recognized these 4 as 10 times better than all of the leaders that he had in his nation. And we'll learn why as we get on through the book. But this is a special miracle that God has caused to happen just starting in the book. We may not realize it, but our own situation, your own situation, God performs miracles so that you can do things that are miraculous. Now, what we've seen as we've studied here, Daniel's situation, the war took him away from his family. He was made to be a eunuch. He was forced an education that his family wouldn't have approved of. His name was changed to delete the name of his God from him. They tried to make him eat unclean food. And Daniel was in a situation that he would never have a chance to see his family again. Did Daniel have good reason to give up? I would say he did, but he didn't. Daniel's actions were he purposed in his heart. We'll see that as we study that nobody forgot who Daniel was. My judge is God. He did supremely well in school. He got noticed there, and he didn't eat the unclean food that was offered to him. Excuse me, let me get rid of this arrow here. All right. In clicking around, I went past where I was supposed to be here. All right. God's action. Sounds simple. Daniel looked better. He did well in school, just by chance, just by luck. He didn't get the credit. God handed it all to him. Daniel didn't know God well, or if Daniel didn't know God well, it would seem that all would be lost. All of this special deal would be lost. But he knew his God well. God didn't just give in. Do you ever feel like God's not with you? God's results. God put Daniel in the hands of the king for a blessing. All things work together for good to those that love God. God put Daniel into the hands of the king for a blessing. God gave Daniel favor with the chief captors. God gave Daniel great success in knowledge and learning. God gave Daniel wisdom. God gave Daniel understanding of dreams and visions. This is not the end of the story. This is just the start. God continues to give. In verse 21, and Daniel continued even unto the first year of King Cyrus. Cyrus was the king of Medo-Persia, the ones that took over after Babylon. But this means that Daniel stayed in the land for something at least 70 years. He never saw his parents again. One may think that the lives of these teenagers were ruined. Daniel would never have been heard of if he hadn't been taken into rule by Nebuchadnezzar. Anyway, the point is that God has a plan. He's going to carry out his plan, and it's going to be for their good. God has a plan for us also. And as part of that plan, he wants us to be saved. It says in Romans chapter 10, verse 9, that if thou shalt confess with thy mouth the Lord Jesus, and shalt believe in thine heart that God hath raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. This is a verse that announces the simple message of the gospel, that if thou shalt confess with thy mouth the Lord Jesus, and shalt believe in thine heart that God hath raised him, that is Jesus, from the dead, thou shalt be saved. Reason? For with the heart man believes unto righteousness. We can't be in heaven unless we're righteous. But with the heart man believeth unto righteousness, and with the mouth confession is made unto salvation. Are you saved today? That's where God's plan really starts in your life. I hope you're saved. If you're not, please review these verses. And thank you for being with me in this study.